Hello, we'll do the lesson with the photographer by Stephen Leacock. So, narrator, he wants his photographs taken. So, he goes to a photographer's shop, photographer's studio, and he says, I want my photograph taken. The photographer looked at me without enthusiasm. The photographer is surprised that anyone should come into his studio, and he looks at him in a sort of dull way. He was a drooping man in a grey suit with the dim eye of a natural scientist. So the photographer was a drooping man. His arms were, his shoulders were bent, his back was bent, and he was probably a little flabby about the stomach, and his head is also turned downwards. So he was a drooping man. Drooping means bent. He was a drooping man and he was wearing a grey suit and he had the dim eye of a natural scientist. A natural scientist is one who studies nature. So he studies things like insects, plants, and so on. So if you look into a microscope or look through a magnifying glass at some insect or some plant, the eyes will become dim. So the photographer probably had a hobby and he had the dim eye of a natural scientist. But there is no need to describe him. Everybody knows what a photographer is like. And so everybody knows what a photographer looks like. Sit there, he said, and wait. I waited an hour. So the narrator waits an hour in the waiting room. I read the Ladies' Companion for 1912, the Girls' Magazine for 1902, and the Infants' Journal for 1888. So in the waiting room, on the coffee table, there are some old magazines, and those magazines are the Ladies' Companion, which came out in the year 1912. There was the Girls' Magazine from the year 1902, and the Infants' Journal from the year 1888. So he waits an hour in the waiting room and he reads all these. I began to see that I had done an unwarrantable thing in breaking in on the privacy of this man's scientific pursuits with a face like mine. So the narrator begins to think after waiting for an hour that he had done something mistakenly. The photographer was probably doing something else. So the narrator thinks he should not have come to disturb the other's privacy. So he had done an unwarrantable thing, something which cannot be excused, something which cannot be explained. So, and he thinks that his face is also not a very photogenic face, and so the photographer is making him wait for so long. After an hour, the photographer opened the inner door. Come in, he said severely. I went into the studio. Sit down, said the photographer. I sat down in a beam of sunlight, filtered through a sheet of factory cotton hung against a frosted skylight. So the studio is nothing but a room, and on the roof of the room, on the ceiling of the room, there is a skylight. Skylight is something which is placed over the ceilings, over the roofs of older houses, so that that sunlight can come in and light the room. And against this frosted skylight, frosted means it's not clear glass; it's frosted glass. That is, it's milky white. So on this again, over this frosted skylight, the photographer had hung a sheet of factory cotton. He had placed a piece of cotton cloth over the frosted skylight so that the light inside the studio should not become too bright for the photographs to be taken. The photographer rolled a machine into the middle of the room and crawled into it from behind. So, in those days when the story was written, the camera was not held in the hands like it is now. You could not take a picture with the portable camera. The camera was had to be wheeled in on a tripod. Maybe it was placed on a tripod. The tripod had wheels, and it was a very large machine. It was a big machine, and the photographer had to crawl into it from behind, place a piece of black cloth over himself so that the light doesn't come in and spoil the negative. And he had to open the shutter with his hands and press a bulb so that the flash would go off. And it was all in all, it was a very huge piece of equipment that photographs were taken in. Cameras were very big in those days. He was only in it a second, just time enough for one look at me, and then he was out again, tearing at the cotton sheet and the window panes with a hook stick, apparently frantic for light and air. So the photographer looks at him through the camera and he thinks there's not enough light, there's not enough air. So he takes a hook stick and removes the factory cotton from the skylight, and then he think then he crawled back into the machine again, drew a little black cloth over himself. So that little black cloth is placed over the head of the photographer so that light doesn't come and spoil the negative. This time he was very quiet in there. I knew that he was praying and I kept still. So the photograph has to be taken very carefully. So the narrator kept very still so that the photograph wouldn't be blurred. When the photographer came out at last, he looked very grave and shook his head. When the photographer came out of the piece of black cloth, he looked very serious and he shook his head as though there was something wrong with the narrator. The face is quite wrong, he said. I know, I answered quietly. I have always known it. Narrator knows that his face is not very photogenic. He sighed. I think the face would be better three quarters full. So the photographer thinks that probably the face would be better if a close up was got. I'm sure it would, I said enthusiastically, for I was glad to find that the man had such a human side to him. So would yours. In fact, I continued, how many faces one sees that are apparently hard, narrow, limited, but the minute one gets them three quarters full, they get wide, large, almost bounded. Narrator knows this is not a photogenic face, so he is grateful that the photographer has human side to him, that will make his face look attractive in the photograph. So, but the photographer had ceased to listen. As the narrator continues to speak, the photographer stops listening. He came over and took my head in his hands and twisted it sideways. So he looks at the narrator's face from the side, probably for a profile picture. I thought he meant to kiss me, and I closed my eyes. But I was wrong. He twisted my face as far as it would go, and then stood looking at it. He sighed again. I don't like the head, he said. Then he went back to the machine and took another look. Open the mouth a little. I started to do so. Close it, he added quickly. Then he looked again. The ears are bad, he said. Droop them, bend them a little more. Thank you. Now the eyes, roll them in under the lids. Put the hands on the knees, please. And turn the face up just a little upward. Yes, that's better. Now just expand the lungs, expand the chest. So, and hump the neck, bend the neck, and that's it. And just contract the waist hard and twist the hip up toward the elbow. Now, I still don't quite like the face. It's just a trifle too full. But I swung myself round on the stool. The photographer gives a lot of instructions, very detailed instruction. The narrator tries to follow all the instructions. That is, he bends the ears down, he rolls his eyes under his lids, he puts his hands on his knees, turns his face a bit upward. He follows all the detailed instructions. But then it gets a bit too much for him, and the narrator gets really frustrated and he swings round on the stool to stand up. Stop, I said with emotion, but I think with dignity. So the narrator becomes really annoyed and he says, stop. This face is my face. It is not yours, it is mine. I've lived with it for 40 years and I know its faults. I know it's out of drawing. It means he knows it's not worthy to be drawn. I know it wasn't made for me, but it's my face, the only one I have. So he starts to defend his face. He says that he cannot do anything about his face. That's the way it is. I was conscious of a break in my voice, but I went on. So he becomes almost desperate because he cannot do a thing about the way he looks. So, because he's helpless, his voice, he cannot continue to defend his face, so his voice breaks a little. But he goes on. Such as it is, I've learned to love it, and this is my mouth, not yours. These ears are mine, and if your machine is too narrow, here I started to rise from the seat. So he starts to get up and sneak. The photographer had pulled a string. The photograph taken. I could see the machine still staggering from the shock. So the photographer presses a bulb just as the narrator gets so frustrated that he doesn't want to sit for the photograph anymore. Just as he's about to rise from this seat, the photographer clicks the picture and the photograph is taken. And the machine was, the flash bulb went off and the machine was shaking from the shock of that thing. So I said bitingly, features, eh? No, before that. I think, said the photographer, pursing his lips in a pleased smile, that I caught the features just in a moment of animation. The photographer is pleased because the features of the narrator, that's the facial features, the eyes, the mouth, the ears, and everything, they were caught in a moment of animation when there was an expression on them. So the best way to take a photograph is when somebody is showing some expression on their faces. So the photographer is pleased that he took the photograph when narrator was showing some expression, uh, and then, but the narrator is not so happy. So I said bitingly, features, eh? You didn't think I could animate them, I suppose, but let me see the picture. So the narrator thinks you thought perhaps that I couldn't show any expression, that I was, my face doesn't show any feeling whatsoever. But I asked him to let him see the picture. Oh, there's nothing to see yet. I have to develop the negative first. Come back on Saturday and let you see, and I'll let you see a proof of it. So in those days, the photographs they were taken in the camera. The negatives were taken to what is called a dark room, in which the only source of light was a red glowing light, and in that dark room, the negatives were exposed to some chemicals, and the photograph would emerge from the negative. So it takes some time for the negatives to be developed. So the photographer asked him to come back on Saturday. On Saturday, I went back. The photographer beckoned me. He signals the narrator to come in. I thought he seemed quieter and graver than before. So the photographer looks even quieter and more serious than he did before. I think too there was a certain pride in his manner. So the photographer probably thinks he's done a very good job, so he shows a certain pride. He unfolded the proof of a large photograph, and we both looked at it in silence. Is it me? I asked. So the narrator doesn't recognize what he sees in the photograph. Yes, he said quietly, it is you, and we went on looking at it. The eyes, I said hesitatingly, don't look very much like mine. Oh no, I've retouched them. They came out splendidly, don't they? And so the photographer has changed the way the eyes look in the photograph. Fine, I said, but surely my eyebrows are not like that. No, said the photographer with a momentary glance at my face. So the photographer looks at the narrator's face and sees that the eyebrows of the narrator are not like those in the photograph. If the eyebrows have been removed, we have a process now, the Delphide, for putting in new ones. So there is a process in photography called the Delphide which removes the eyebrows. You'll notice there we applied it to carry the hair away from the brow. So the photographer has applied the Delphi process to remove the hair of the narrator from the brow in the photograph. I don't like the hair low on the skull. Oh, you don't you? I said. No, he went on, I don't care for it. I like to get the hair clear back to the superficies and make out a new brow line. So the photographer says he doesn't want the hair to cover the forehead. He wants it straight back to the edge. So he's used the Delphi process and he wants to expose the forehead. So the narrator continues. Oh, what about the mouth? I said with bitterness that was lost in the photograph. Is that mine? So the narrator asks bitterly. He's very angry and upset, but the tone of voice which conveys his bitterness doesn't seem to register with the photographer. And he says, yes, is the mouth his? It's adjusted at Leo's is too low. I found I couldn't use it. So the photographer has retouched the photograph, even the mouth. The ears, though, strike me as a good likeness. They're just like mine. Is it me? Is it me? Yes, said the photographer thoughtfully, but that's so. But I can fix that all right in the print. We have a process now, the sulfide, for removing the ears entirely. So the photographer doesn't think the ears of the narrator are look good in the photograph. So he says he'll use a process called the sulfide, which will remove the ears entirely, and he tries to continue, but the narrator gets so angry and so upset that he bursts out. Listen, I interrupted, drawing myself up and animating my features to their full extent, and speaking with a withering scorn that should have blasted the man on the spot. So, as the photographer continues to expound on his views on how to make the photograph look better, the narrator gets so angry and so upset that he bursts out, listen. And he spoke with such scorn. Scorn is real, showing the other person contempt. He's contemptuous of this photographer. He stands up to his full height, and that scorn, that contempt in his voice should have blasted the man on the spot. And he continues, listen, I came here for a photograph, a picture, something which, mad though it seems, would have looked like me. So he says he wants a photograph that looks like that is a picture of himself. I wanted something that would depict my face as heaven gave it to me, humble though the gift may have been. So he says, my face is not a very photogenic face, not a very handsome face, but you see, heaven has given it to me, and I want the photograph of my face. I don't want it retouched, I don't want it redone, I don't want the features to be changed. I want a photograph of me that looks like me. That's what he wanted to say. I wanted something that my friends might keep after my death to reconcile them to my loss. So he wants something for his friends to keep after he passes away, and he wants his friends to look at his photograph and remember him and reconcile themselves to his loss. It seems that I was mistaken. What I wanted is no longer done. So, what he wants, a photograph of his face, is no longer done. Go on then with your brutal work. Go on then with your cruel work. Take your negative or whatever it is you call it, dip it in sulfide, bromide, oxide, cowhide, anything you like. Remove the eyes, correct the mouth, adjust the face, restore the lips, reanimate the necktie, and reconstruct the waistcoat. So he suggests all sorts of processes and procedures for the photographer to carry out on his photograph. Coat it with an inch of gloss, shade it, emboss it, gild it till even you acknowledge that it's finished. So he asks the photographer to change the photograph as much as he wants with whatever procedures, whatever processes that he can think of. Then, when you have done all that, keep it for yourself and your friends. They may value it. So, keep the photograph for yourself after you've done it to your satisfaction, after you retouch it to your satisfaction. To me, it is a worthless bauble. So, as it is, the photograph that has been taken is worthless. It is something like a piece of plastic jewel. So it's a worthless bauble. The photograph as it is. So the narrator gets really angry, upset, and frustrated, and he leaves the photographer's shop. Thank you.